In a small research center located just outside of Chicago, Dr. Laura Bennett was busy examining samples from her latest discovery. She had been part of a team sent to the moon for an archaeological dig, and what she found there would change everything. It wasn't gold or ancient artifacts that caught her attention. It was something much stranger. Buried deep beneath the lunar soil, she uncovered a single seed. At first glance, it didn't look like anything special, but as she held it in her gloved hand, she noticed something odd. The seed seemed to glow faintly, its surface shimmering with colors that shifted under the light. Back on Earth, Laura couldn't stop thinking about the seed. She showed it to her colleague, Dr. Ryan Carter, who worked alongside her at the facility. Ryan was skeptical at first. "It's probably just some weird rock," he said, shrugging off her excitement. But when Laura placed the seed under a microscope, they both saw something incredible. Tiny patterns etched into its surface looked almost like circuitry, too precise to be natural or human-made. Laura felt a spark of curiosity ignite within her. What if this seed came from somewhere far beyond Earth? What if it held secrets about life on other planets? Laura decided to run an experiment. She set up a controlled environment in the lab, creating a miniature greenhouse where she could try to grow the seed. She carefully adjusted the temperature, humidity, and light to mimic conditions that might exist on alien worlds. Then, with trembling hands, she planted the seed in nutrient-rich soil and waited. Days passed without any sign of growth, and Ryan began to tease her about wasting time on what he called a wild goose chase. But Laura refused to give up. Something about the seed told her it was alive, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. On the 5th day, something extraordinary happened. A tiny sprout pushed through the soil, fragile yet unmistakably alive. Laura gasped as she watched it grow before her eyes, stretching upward with astonishing speed. Within hours, the sprout had transformed into a small tree, its branches twisting and curling like living sculptures. The leaves were sharp-edged and gleamed like polished metal, reflecting light in strange ways. As Laura leaned closer to inspect it, she felt a chill run down her spine. The air around the tree seemed heavier, charged with energy. Ryan joined her later that afternoon, his skepticism melting away as he stared at the rapidly growing plant. "This isn't normal," he muttered, running his fingers over the smooth bark. "Nothing grows this fast, not even bamboo." He pulled out a notebook and began jotting down observations, while Laura ran tests to analyze the tree's composition. What they discovered shocked them both. The tree wasn't just unusual, it defied every known law of biology. Its cells regenerated at an impossible rate, and its roots secreted chemicals that reacted violently with certain metals. But the strangest thing about the tree wasn't its appearance or behavior, it was how it made people feel. Over the next few days, staff members working near the greenhouse reported hearing faint whispers, though no one could pinpoint where the sounds were coming from. Some claimed the tree emitted a low hum, almost like music, while others described feeling uneasy whenever they entered the room. Laura dismissed these accounts as stress or imagination, but deep down, she couldn't ignore the unease creeping into her own mind. One evening, as Laura stayed late to monitor the tree, she noticed something peculiar. When she touched one of its branches, the tree responded. Its leaves quivered, and a soft pulse of light traveled along its trunk. It was as if the tree knew she was there, reacting to her presence. Laura stepped back, her heart racing. For the first time, she wondered if bringing the seed back to Earth had been a mistake. The tree continued to grow, spreading its roots deeper into the soil and stretching its branches toward the artificial lights above. Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far greater, and potentially more dangerous, than they understood. Yet, despite her growing concerns, she couldn't bring herself to stop studying it. There was something mesmerizing about the tree, something that drew her in and refused to let go. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a journey that would test humanity's limits and terrify those watching from the stars. As the days turned into weeks, the tree in the greenhouse grew taller and more imposing. Its branches stretched out like arms reaching for something unseen, while its razor-sharp leaves glinted under the artificial lights. Laura spent every waking moment observing it, documenting its growth, and running tests to understand its biology. Ryan joined her occasionally, though his initial skepticism had shifted to a mix of fascination and unease. Together, they marveled at how quickly the tree adapted to its new environment, almost as if it were learning. One morning, Laura arrived at the lab to find something strange hanging from the tree's lower branches. Small pods, no bigger than a fist, dangled precariously, their surfaces smooth and dark like polished stone. She reached out cautiously, hesitating before plucking one of them off the branch. The pod felt heavier than it looked, and when she turned it over in her hands, she noticed tiny cracks forming along its surface. Before she could react, the pod split open with a soft hiss, releasing a cloud of fine, glittering spores into the air. Laura coughed, waving her hand to clear the dust-like particles from her face. At first, nothing seemed amiss, but moments later, she began to feel lightheaded. Colors around her blurred, and faint whispers echoed in her ears, voices speaking words she couldn't understand. Shaking her head, she stumbled back, dropping the empty pod onto the floor. Ryan rushed in just as she steadied herself against the wall. "What happened?" he asked, his eyes darting between her and the fallen pod. Laura pointed to the tree, her voice trembling. "The pods. They release spores." Ryan examined the remaining pods carefully, using gloves and tweezers to avoid direct contact. He placed one inside a sealed container and took it to the lab for analysis. What they discovered was alarming. The spores weren't harmless. They contained microscopic organisms capable of altering brain chemistry. When inhaled, the spores triggered vivid hallucinations and heightened emotions, making people see or hear things that weren't real. Ryan frowned as he reviewed the data. "This isn't just some random plant," he said. "It's designed to mess with your mind." Determined to learn more, Laura and Ryan decided to conduct controlled experiments. They introduced animals into the greenhouse, a few mice and a rabbit, to observe how they reacted to prolonged exposure to the tree. At first, the animals seemed unaffected, sniffing curiously at the roots and nibbling on stray leaves. But within hours, their behavior changed drastically. The mice became aggressive, attacking each other without provocation, while the rabbit cowered in a corner, refusing to move even when offered food. Laura watched in horror as the once calm creatures succumbed to chaos. Word of their findings spread quickly through the facility, drawing both curiosity and concern from other researchers. Some suggested isolating the tree completely, fearful of what might happen if the spores escaped into the ventilation system. Others argued that the tree's unique properties could be harnessed for good, for example, studying its regenerative abilities to develop new medical treatments. Laura listened to these debates but remained conflicted. On one hand, she saw the potential benefits of understanding such a remarkable organism. On the other hand, she couldn't ignore the dangers it posed. That night, unable to sleep, Laura returned to the lab alone. She stood in front of the tree, staring at its twisting branches and shimmering leaves. Something about it felt alive, not just biologically, but consciously. It was as if the tree knew she was there, watching her every move. As she leaned closer, she thought she heard a faint whisper again, this time clearer than before. "Grow," it seemed to say, though she couldn't be sure. Her heart raced as she stepped back, shaking her head. Was she imagining things, or was the tree trying to communicate? By the end of the week, the tree had grown so large that it nearly filled the greenhouse. Its roots snaked across the floor, cracking tiles and burrowing into the soil beneath. Laura and Ryan discussed ways to slow its growth, but none of their efforts worked. No matter what they tried, the tree continued to thrive, consuming resources at an alarming rate. It was becoming clear that they were dealing with something far beyond their control. Despite the growing risks, Laura couldn't bring herself to destroy the tree. There was still so much to learn, so many questions left unanswered. Yet, deep down, she knew they were playing with fire. The tree wasn't just a scientific marvel. It was a mystery wrapped in danger, and humanity hadn't yet realized the full extent of what it had unleashed. The tree's growth was unstoppable. Every day, it stretched taller and wider, its roots breaking through the greenhouse floor and spreading into the soil beneath. Laura and Ryan worked tirelessly to contain it, but their efforts only seemed to make it stronger. The pods hanging from its branches multiplied, and the spores they released filled the air with a faint, shimmering mist. Even with masks and protective gear, the researchers couldn't avoid breathing in small amounts of the particles. Strange things began happening around the facility. One afternoon, a lab assistant named Megan reported hearing voices coming from the empty hallway outside her office. She described them as soft whispers, like people talking just out of earshot. When she stepped out to investigate, no one was there. Another researcher, Daniel, claimed he saw shadowy figures moving near the greenhouse late at night, even though the area was supposed to be locked down. At first, Laura dismissed these stories as stress or overactive imaginations, but then she started experiencing it herself. Late one evening, after everyone else had gone home, Laura stayed behind to check on the tree. As she stood in front of it, she felt a sudden chill run down her spine. The whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping in a language she didn't understand. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sound, but when she opened them again, something was different. The tree seemed closer. Its branches had stretched toward her, almost as if reaching out. Panic surged through her chest, and she backed away quickly, tripping over a loose tile and landing hard on the floor. Her heart pounded as she scrambled to her feet and fled the room. The next day, Laura shared what happened with Ryan. He listened quietly, his expression unreadable. "We need to shut this down," he said finally. "Whatever this thing is, it's not safe." Laura hesitated. Part of her agreed. Every instinct screamed that they were dealing with something dangerous. But another part of her resisted the idea of destroying the tree. It was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, the living piece of an alien world. Could they really throw that away without understanding it fully? Ryan wasn't convinced. "You're too close to this," he said sharply. "It's messing with your head, Laura. We can't afford to ignore the risks." Despite his warnings, Laura refused to act immediately. Instead, she proposed a compromise. They would seal off the greenhouse, limiting access to only essential personnel, and continue studying the tree remotely using cameras and sensors. Ryan reluctantly agreed, though he made it clear he thought they were making a mistake. As the days passed, the situation grew worse. More staff members reported strange experiences, vivid dreams, unexplained feelings of dread, and moments where reality seemed to blur. One technician swore he saw the tree move when no one was touching it, its branches swaying even though there was no breeze. Another claimed the whispers spoke directly to him, calling his name in a voice that sounded eerily familiar. Laura tried to reassure everyone that these were side effects of the spores, hallucinations caused by exposure. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Then came the incident with the rabbits. Earlier in the week, Laura and Ryan had placed several rabbits in cages near the tree to study how prolonged exposure affected them. The animals had grown increasingly agitated, pacing back and forth and biting at the bars of their cages. One morning, they found all the rabbits dead. Their bodies showed no signs of injury, but their eyes were wide open, frozen in expressions of pure terror. Laura stared at the lifeless creatures, a knot forming in her stomach. Whatever the tree was doing, it wasn't just affecting humans. It was killing everything around it. That night, Laura sat alone in her office, staring at the security footage from the greenhouse. On the screen, the tree loomed large, its branches swaying gently despite the lack of wind. She rewound the video and played it again, pausing at random intervals. Something about the movement of the branches caught her attention. They weren't just swaying. They were pulsing, almost rhythmically, like a heartbeat. A cold sweat broke out across her forehead as she realized what she was seeing. The tree wasn't just alive. It was growing smarter. Laura knew they couldn't keep pretending everything was under control. The tree was evolving, adapting to its environment, and possibly to the people around it. If they didn't do something soon, it might become impossible to stop. But as much as she wanted to believe they could contain it, a nagging fear crept into her mind. What if the tree wasn't meant to be contained? What if it had been sent here for a reason? One they couldn't yet comprehend. Late one night, as Laura sat in her office reviewing data from the greenhouse, her computer screen flickered unexpectedly. She frowned and reached for the mouse, thinking it was just a technical glitch. But before she could do anything, strange symbols began appearing on the screen, one after another, filling the blank document she had been working on. They weren't random shapes. They looked deliberate, like writing in a language she didn't recognize. Her heart raced as she leaned closer, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The symbols shifted and rearranged themselves until they formed words in plain English. "You must destroy the organism immediately." Laura gasped, her hands flying to cover her mouth. She glanced around the room, half expecting someone to jump out and tell her it was a prank. But she was alone. The message wasn't coming from anyone in the facility. It seemed to be coming from somewhere else. Shaking, Laura grabbed her phone and called Ryan. He arrived within minutes, his hair disheveled, and his face pale with exhaustion. When she showed him the message, he stared at the screen in silence, his jaw tightening. "This isn't possible," he muttered, shaking his head. "How is this even happening?" Laura explained that the message had appeared out of nowhere, insisting she hadn't touched anything unusual before it started. Ryan ran a quick diagnostic on her computer, but found no evidence of hacking or malware. Whatever, or whoever, had sent the message, it wasn't using normal means. Desperate for answers, Laura contacted NASA's Extraterrestrial Communication Division. She knew they had protocols in place for situations like this, though she never imagined she'd need them. A scientist named Dr. Eric Dawson responded to her call almost immediately. He listened carefully as Laura described the tree, the spores, and now the mysterious message. His tone grew serious when she mentioned the symbols on her screen. "We've seen something like this before," he admitted. "It might be an alien species attempting to communicate." Over the next few hours, Eric worked remotely with Laura and Ryan to establish a connection with the unknown sender. Using advanced translation algorithms, they managed to piece together fragments of the conversation. The messages were coming from a species calling themselves the Vailith. Their tone was urgent, bordering on desperate. They identified the tree as a Kelthra tree, native to their home planet, a world so hostile that only the hardiest organisms could survive. According to the Vailith, the tree was not just dangerous, it was catastrophic. "It consumes everything," one translated message read. "Resources, life forms, entire ecosystems. It adapts faster than you can stop it." Another warned, "Your containment measures will fail. You must act now." Laura felt a lump form in her throat as she read the words aloud to Ryan. This wasn't just a warning. It was a plea. The Vailith weren't angry or threatening. They sounded genuinely afraid, for humanity and for themselves. Ryan paced the room, running his fingers through his hair. "They're telling us to destroy it," he said, his voice tense. "But what if they're wrong? What if we can control it?" Laura shot him a sharp look. "Control it? Ryan, people are already hallucinating, animals are dying, and the tree is growing out of control. How much more proof do we need?" Ryan hesitated, clearly torn between curiosity and fear. Eric chimed in over the video call. "Dr. Bennett, Dr. Carter, I understand your desire to study this organism, but the Vailith aren't exaggerating. If the Kelthra tree spreads beyond your facility..." He trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. Laura nodded slowly, her resolve strengthening. She knew what they had to do, even if it meant sacrificing months of research and risking backlash from their colleagues. As dawn broke outside, Laura turned back to the computer screen, where the Vailith's messages continued to scroll. For the first time, she noticed a pattern in the symbols, almost like a rhythm or code. She wondered how long the Valeth had been watching Earth, waiting for the right moment to intervene. And she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Humanity had brought this danger upon itself, all in the name of discovery. Now, it was up to them to fix their mistake. But destroying the tree wouldn't be easy. It had grown too large, too powerful. And the whispers, those faint, haunting voices, were growing louder every day. The Valeth's warnings grew more urgent with each passing hour. Through the translation algorithms, they began sharing fragments of their history, painting a grim picture of what the Kelthra tree was capable of. On their home planet, the tree had once been a minor species, thriving in isolated regions where no other life could survive. But over time, it evolved, growing smarter, faster, and more aggressive. Entire ecosystems fell to its relentless hunger. The Valeth described barren wastelands left in its wake, places where even the soil had been stripped of nutrients. Laura listened intently as Eric relayed the translations. She felt a chill creep up her spine when the Valeth mentioned something called the Spore Storm. It was an event that occurred when the Kelthra tree reached maturity. Its pods would burst simultaneously, releasing billions of spores into the atmosphere. These spores didn't just cause hallucinations. They mutated living organisms, turning plants, animals, and even intelligent beings into hosts for the tree's expansion. The Valeth explained that their own civilization had narrowly escaped extinction by containing one such storm, though at great cost. Ryan sat silently during these exchanges, his face pale. He had always been fascinated by the idea of alien life, but this was far beyond anything he'd imagined. The thought of humanity facing a similar fate weighed heavily on him. Still, he struggled to accept the Valeth's solution. Destroying the tree isn't going to teach us how to deal with threats like this in the future, he argued. If we don't study it now, we'll be completely unprepared if another one shows up. Laura understood his point, but she couldn't ignore the growing evidence. The tree wasn't just dangerous. It was actively spreading. Its roots had broken through the greenhouse floor and were now creeping into the foundation of the entire facility. Sensors detected unusual activity in the electrical systems, causing lights to flicker and equipment to malfunction. Staff members reported feeling increasingly uneasy, some refusing to enter certain areas altogether. Laura knew they were running out of time. Eric tried to mediate the tension between Laura and Ryan. "Look," he said, leaning forward on the video call screen. "I get it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime discovery. But the Valeth aren't asking you to destroy it because they want to stop science. They're doing it because they've seen firsthand what happens when humans underestimate something like this. You can't contain it forever." Laura nodded slowly. She agreed with Eric, but convincing others wouldn't be easy. When she presented the Valeth's warnings to the rest of the team, reactions were mixed. Some researchers sided with Ryan, arguing that destroying the tree would mean throwing away valuable knowledge. Others, however, were visibly shaken by the accounts of the Spore Storm and supported immediate action. Megan, the lab assistant who had first reported hearing voices, broke down in tears. "I don't care about studying it anymore," she said. "I just want it gone." As the debate raged on, Laura noticed something disturbing. The tree seemed to react to the heightened emotions in the room. Its branches swayed slightly, even though there was no breeze, and a faint hum filled the air. She glanced at Ryan, who was too busy arguing to notice. Was the tree somehow aware of their discussions? The thought made her stomach churn. That evening, Laura returned to the greenhouse alone. She stood in front of the towering plant, staring at its shimmering leaves and pulsating trunk. For a moment, she swore she saw movement within its bark, tiny cracks forming and sealing themselves again, almost like breathing. The whispers returned, louder this time, overlapping in a chaotic symphony. She clenched her fists, fighting the urge to run. "Why are you here?" she whispered, half expecting no answer. To her shock, the tree responded, not with words, but with images flashing in her mind. She saw desolate landscapes, skies choked with ash, and creatures twisted beyond recognition. Then came a vision of Earth, blanketed in darkness, its cities crumbling as the tree spread unchecked. Laura stumbled backward, gasping for air. The message was clear. The Kelthra tree wasn't just a plant. It was a force of nature, designed to consume and conquer. When she finally composed herself, Laura realized there was only one choice left. The Vaylith were right. Humanity wasn't ready for something like this. Destroying the tree wasn't just necessary, it was essential for survival. But as she walked away from the greenhouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that the tree wasn't done with them yet. The decision to destroy the Kelthra tree weighed heavily on Laura. She knew it was the right thing to do, but the thought of ending months of research and potentially losing the chance to learn more about alien life left her torn. Ryan, however, refused to accept the plan. "We can't just give up," he insisted during one of their heated discussions. "There has to be another way. We could neutralize the spores or find a way to control its growth. Destroying it is reckless." Laura tried to reason with him, explaining that the tree's behavior was becoming unpredictable. Its roots were spreading beyond the greenhouse, cracking walls, and reaching into nearby rooms. The whispers had grown louder too, affecting nearly everyone in the facility. Some staff members claimed they heard their own names being called, while others reported seeing shadowy figures moving through the halls. Laura herself had started waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, after vivid dreams of the tree consuming entire cities. Despite her arguments, Ryan remained stubborn. Late one night, while Laura was reviewing evacuation plans, she caught him sneaking into the greenhouse. He carried a small container filled with samples he had taken from the tree's pods earlier that day. When confronted, he admitted he had been secretly experimenting with the spores, hoping to develop a chemical compound that could suppress the tree's aggressive tendencies. "I'm not giving up on this," he said firmly. "If we can figure out how to stop the hallucinations and mutations, we won't need to destroy it." Laura felt a mix of anger and fear. "You're playing with fire, Ryan," she snapped. "What if you make things worse? What if the spores spread outside the lab?" But Ryan brushed off her concerns, insisting he was close to a breakthrough. Reluctantly, Laura decided to let him continue his work, though she kept a close eye on him. She didn't trust the tree, or what it might do to someone who underestimated it. Meanwhile, preparations for the tree's destruction moved forward. Eric coordinated with NASA to bring in specialists capable of handling hazardous materials. They devised a plan to flood the facility with a specially formulated foam designed to suffocate the tree and neutralize its spores. It was risky, but it seemed like the only option. Laura volunteered to oversee the operation, knowing she bore responsibility for bringing the seed back to Earth in the first place. As the team worked on finalizing the plan, strange events began escalating. One morning, Megan burst into Laura's office, her face pale with terror. "It's moving," she stammered. "The tree. It's breaking through the walls." Laura rushed to the greenhouse to find the situation even worse than Megan had described. The tree's branches had pierced through the glass panes, stretching outward as if searching for new territory. Its roots were now visible above ground, snaking across the floor and leaving cracks in their wake. Panic spread among the staff. Several researchers refused to come within 50 feet of the greenhouse, while others demanded immediate evacuation. Laura struggled to maintain order, reminding everyone that staying calm was crucial. But inside, she felt anything but calm. Every fiber of her being screamed that they were running out of time. That evening, Laura received another message from the Vaylith. This one was shorter and more urgent. "Do not delay. The organism grows stronger." Eric translated the warning and urged Laura to act quickly. "They're right," he said over the video call. "If you wait much longer, the tree might become impossible to stop." Laura nodded, her resolve firming. She knew what had to be done. But as she prepared to brief the team on the next steps, she couldn't shake the feeling that the tree was aware of their plans. Its branches swayed rhythmically, almost mockingly, and the hum in the air grew louder. For the first time, Laura wondered if destroying the tree would truly end the threat, or if it was already too late. The morning of the planned operation arrived, and tension hung thick in the air. Laura stood outside the greenhouse, watching as a team of specialists in hazmat suits prepared the equipment needed to flood the facility with foam. The tree loomed behind the cracked glass walls, its branches now stretching far beyond the confines of the greenhouse. It seemed to pulse with energy, almost as if it knew what was coming. Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far more intelligent and dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Ryan appeared at her side, his face pale but determined. He still hadn't given up on finding a way to save the tree. "Laura, please," he said quietly, pulling her aside. "Just give me a little more time. I think I'm close to neutralizing the spores." Laura shook her head firmly. "There's no more time, Ryan. Look at it. It's already breaking free. If we don't act now, it'll spread beyond this building." Ryan clenched his fists, frustration flashing in his eyes. "And if you're wrong about this, what then? You'll destroy the single most important discovery humanity has ever made." Before Laura could respond, chaos erupted inside the facility. One of the researchers accidentally tripped an alarm while moving equipment near the greenhouse. In the confusion, a pod hanging from the tree burst open, releasing a cloud of spores into the ventilation system. Within seconds, the entire building was filled with this shimmering mist. People began coughing and stumbling, their faces contorted in fear or confusion. Some dropped to their knees, clutching their heads as if trying to block out overwhelming noise. Others ran blindly through the halls, shouting incoherently. Laura grabbed a mask and rushed toward the control room, where the foam deployment system was located. She knew they had to act quickly before the spores spread further. Along the way, she passed Megan, who was curled up in a corner, sobbing uncontrollably. "They're here," Megan whispered, her wide eyes darting around the empty hallway. "I can hear them. They're everywhere." Laura hesitated for a moment, her heart aching for the terrified woman, but forced herself to keep moving. When she reached the control room, she found Eric on the video call screen, his expression grim. "What's happening?" he asked urgently. Laura explained the situation as calmly as she could. "The spores are loose," she said. "We need to deploy the foam now, or this whole place will be lost." Eric nodded. "Do it. But be careful. The tree might react violently." As Laura initiated the foam deployment sequence, the tree did exactly that. Its branches thrashed wildly, shattering the remaining glass walls of the greenhouse. Roots surged upward, ripping through the floor and tangling around anything they touched. The hum in the air grew deafening, and the whispers became a cacophony of overlapping voices. Laura stumbled back, covering her ears as the sound threatened to overwhelm her. Through the chaos, Ryan appeared again, holding a vial of liquid in his hand. "I did it," he shouted over the noise. "This compound can stop the spores." Laura stared at him, torn between hope and disbelief. "It's too late, Ryan," she yelled back. "Even if it works, we can't risk letting this thing live." Ryan hesitated, his grip tightening on the vial. For a moment, it looked like he might argue further, but then he nodded reluctantly. "Fine," he said. "But if we survive this, promise me we'll try again someday." With the foam rapidly filling the facility, Laura and Ryan made their way to the emergency exit. As they fled, Laura glanced back one last time at the tree. Its branches writhed furiously, as if fighting against the encroaching foam. For a brief second, she thought she saw a pair of glowing eyes embedded in its trunk, staring directly at her. Then the doors slammed shut, sealing the tree inside. Outside, the team regrouped, gasping for fresh air. The foam had done its job, smothering the tree and neutralizing the spores. For now. But as Laura watched the building, she couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't seen the last of the Kelthra tree. Something about it lingered in her mind, a presence she couldn't quite explain. Had they truly stopped it, or merely delayed the inevitable? The foam had silenced the chaos inside the facility, but it hadn't erased the unease that lingered among the survivors. Laura stood outside with Ryan and the rest of the team, watching as hazmat-clad specialists began inspecting the building for signs of remaining spores. The air was heavy with tension, and no one spoke much. Everyone knew the danger wasn't entirely gone. It was just contained for now. Captain Samantha Hayes arrived shortly after the operation ended. She was a tall woman with sharp features and an authoritative presence, leading a military unit tasked with handling biological threats. After assessing the situation, she pulled Laura aside for a private conversation. "Dr. Bennett," she began, her tone firm but calm, "we need to ensure this never happens again. That tree, whatever it is, poses a threat not just to this facility, but to the entire planet." Laura nodded, her throat tight with guilt. "I know," she said softly, "but we didn't understand what we were dealing with at first. None of us did." Samantha studied her for a moment before responding. "That's why we're here, to make sure you don't have to face something like this alone next time. Now tell me everything you know about the organism." As Laura explained the tree's behavior, the spores, the hallucinations, its rapid growth, Samantha listened intently, jotting down notes. When Laura mentioned the Valeth's warnings, Samantha raised an eyebrow. "Aliens warned you?" she asked, skepticism creeping into her voice. Laura hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. They call it the Kelthra tree. According to them, it's capable of consuming entire ecosystems if left unchecked." Samantha frowned, clearly troubled by the implications. If that's true, flooding the facility with foam may not be enough. If even a single spore escapes, it could spread uncontrollably. Her words sent a chill through Laura. She glanced back at the building, wondering if they'd truly sealed the threat or merely delayed it. Later that evening, the team gathered in a makeshift command center set up near the facility. Eric joined via video call, his face pale with worry. "The Valeth contacted me again," he said. "They're urging us to destroy every trace of the tree, including any samples you might still have." His eyes darted toward Ryan, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Laura followed Eric's gaze and immediately understood what he meant. "Ryan," she said sharply, turning to him, "you didn't keep any of those spores, did you?" Ryan hesitated, avoiding her gaze. Finally, he sighed and admitted, "I took a few samples before the foam was deployed. I thought maybe we could study them later, find a way to neutralize the effects." Anger flared in Laura's chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Do you realize how dangerous that is? If those samples get out—" "I know," Ryan interrupted, his voice rising, "but I couldn't just let it all go. This could be humanity's chance to learn from alien life. Don't you see that?" Laura stared at him, torn between frustration and understanding. She wanted to believe there was value in studying the tree, but the risks far outweighed the potential rewards. Samantha stepped in, her tone leaving no room for argument. "All samples must be destroyed immediately," she ordered. "No exceptions. We can't afford to gamble with something like this." Ryan reluctantly handed over the vials he had collected, his shoulders slumping in defeat. As the specialists disposed of the samples, Laura couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. So much effort, so many discoveries, gone in an instant. The next morning, the team conducted a thorough sweep of the facility. To everyone's relief, the foam appeared to have done its job. The tree was reduced to a blackened husk, its branches brittle and lifeless. But as Laura stood in the ruined greenhouse, staring at the remains, she noticed something strange. Tiny cracks ran along the trunk, glowing faintly with the same shimmering light she'd seen before. Her heart sank. Was the tree really dead, or simply dormant? Back outside, Samantha briefed the group on their next steps. "We'll monitor this site closely," she said, "and we'll share what we've learned with global authorities to prevent anything like this from happening again." Laura nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. Had they truly stopped the Kelthra tree, or had they only delayed the inevitable? As she walked away from the facility, she couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers were still there, faint but persistent. echoing in the corners of her mind. The days following the destruction of the Kelthra tree were filled with uncertainty. Laura and the team worked tirelessly to clean up the facility, ensuring no trace of the organism remained. Specialists in hazmat suits combed through every corner of the building, collecting debris and testing for lingering spores. The tree's blackened husk had been removed and incinerated under strict military supervision, but Laura couldn't shake the image of those faintly glowing cracks in its trunk. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the light or stress playing games with her mind. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Ryan had grown quieter since handing over his samples. He avoided eye contact with Laura and spent most of his time alone, staring at reports he no longer seemed interested in writing. The weight of what they'd done, and what he'd almost caused, was clearly taking its toll. One evening, as they sat together in the makeshift command center, Ryan finally spoke. "Do you think we made the right choice?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Laura hesitated before answering. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do know we couldn't risk letting it live. Not after everything that happened." Captain Samantha Hayes remained vigilant, overseeing the cleanup efforts and coordinating with global authorities to share information about the threat. She emphasized the importance of transparency, urging Laura and the team to document everything they had learned about the tree. "This isn't just about us," she said during one briefing. "If another seed like this shows up somewhere else, people need to know how dangerous it is." Laura agreed, though the thought of reliving the past few weeks filled her with dread. Despite their best efforts, strange occurrences continued to plague the facility. Workers reported hearing faint whispers even after the foam deployment, though no one could pinpoint their source. Some claimed to see shadows moving in empty hallways, while others described feeling an inexplicable chill whenever they entered certain rooms. Laura tried to dismiss these accounts as residual effects of the spores, but the unease lingered. It was as if the tree's presence still haunted the building, refusing to let go. One night, unable to sleep, Laura returned to the greenhouse. The space was unrecognizable now, stripped bare and covered in layers of foam residue. Yet, as she stood there, she felt a familiar chill run down her spine. The whispers returned, softer this time but unmistakable. "You can't stop it," they seemed to say. Her breath caught in her throat, and she turned to leave, but not before noticing something glinting on the floor. Bending down, she picked up a small shard of the tree's trunk, its surface faintly glowing. Panic surged through her chest. How had this been missed during the cleanup? Laura rushed to find Samantha, holding the shard out for inspection. "This shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling. Samantha examined the fragment carefully, her expression darkening. "It looks like it's still alive," she muttered. "We need to destroy it immediately." But as they prepared to incinerate the shard, Laura stopped them. "Wait," she said. "What if this is our chance to understand how it grows? If we can figure out why it's still active, maybe we can prevent something like this from happening again." Samantha hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. Finally, she nodded. "Fine. But we do this my way, with maximum security measures in place." Laura agreed, though she couldn't ignore the nagging fear in the back of her mind. They were playing with fire again, and she knew it. Later that night, as the shard was placed under observation, Laura volunteered to stay behind and monitor it. She told herself it was her responsibility, given everything that had happened. But as she sat alone in the lab, watching the faint glow pulse rhythmically, she realized she wasn't doing it just out of duty. Part of her wanted answers, needed them. The tree had changed her, awakened something inside her she couldn't quite explain. When the shard suddenly split open, releasing a tiny cloud of shimmering particles, Laura didn't hesitate. She grabbed a syringe filled with the chemical compound developed to neutralize the spores and injected it directly into the fragment. The glow dimmed instantly, and the whispers faded into silence. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at what remained, a lifeless piece of bark. She had destroyed the last remnant of the Kelthra tree, but the cost weighed heavily on her soul. As dawn broke outside, Laura stepped out of the lab, exhausted but resolute. She knew the world would never fully understand what she had sacrificed, or why. But she also knew one thing for certain. Humanity wasn't ready for something like the Kelthra tree, and she hoped they never would be. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after everything that had happened. The facility was declared safe, though it would take months of repairs before it could reopen. Most of the staff were reassigned to other projects, eager to put the nightmare of the Kelthra tree behind them. But for Laura, moving on wasn't so easy. She spent her days writing reports and documenting every detail of their encounter with the tree, determined to ensure that no one else would make the same mistakes. Eric stayed in touch, helping her piece together the final pieces of the puzzle. Together, they compiled a comprehensive file detailing the tree's behavior, the effects of its spores, and the warnings from the Valeth. The document was shared with scientific organizations and governments worldwide, serving as both a cautionary tale and a guide for handling similar threats in the future. "You've done humanity a great service," Eric told her during one of their calls, "even if it doesn't feel like it right now." Ryan, on the other hand, struggled to find his footing. After the incident, he became withdrawn, avoiding conversations about the tree or the research they had conducted. When Laura tried to talk to him, he would change the subject or leave the room altogether. She suspected he blamed himself, not just for nearly causing disaster with his experiments, but for failing to protect the discovery he had been so passionate about. One day, she found him packing up his belongings at the lab. "I'm transferring to another department," he said quietly. "I need a fresh start." Laura nodded, understanding more than he realized. "Take care of yourself, Ryan," she said simply. He gave her a small, sad smile before walking away. The Valeth reached out one last time, their message brief but heartfelt. "Thank you for listening. Your actions have spared many lives." Laura stared at the screen for a long time after reading the words, tears welling up in her eyes. For all the fear and destruction the Kelthra tree had brought, it had also taught her something invaluable: humility. Humanity wasn't ready to play God with forces it didn't fully understand. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. As the months passed, Laura began to notice subtle changes within herself. The nightmares grew less frequent, and the whispers that had haunted her dreams eventually faded altogether. She still thought about the tree often, wondering what secrets it might have held if things had gone differently. But instead of regret, she felt gratitude for the lessons learned, for the lives saved, and for the chance to move forward. One evening, as she stood outside the rebuilt greenhouse, Laura reflected on everything that had happened. The space was empty now, waiting for new plants and experiments to fill it. She ran her fingers along the smooth glass walls, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't expected. The Kelthra tree had been a test, one humanity had barely passed, but it had also been an opportunity to grow stronger, wiser, and more united. Inside the facility, a plaque was mounted near the entrance to the greenhouse. It read, "In memory of those who faced the unknown with courage and sacrifice to protect us all." Laura smiled faintly as she read the inscription, knowing it wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had played a part in stopping the tree. That night, as she drove home under a star-filled sky, Laura glanced up at the moon. Somewhere out there, the Valeth continued watching, perhaps hopeful that humanity had learned its lesson. Laura knew the universe was vast and full of mysteries, some beautiful, others terrifying. But she also knew one thing for certain: humanity's survival depended not on conquering these mysteries, but on respecting them and learning when to step back. And with that thought, she turned her gaze back to the road ahead, ready to face whatever challenges lay in store.